Welcome to Keith Knight, Don't Tread on Anyone. Here is a brief story about tiny houses, Elvis Summers, and how the free market tried to solve homelessness, but the state violently interfered. This LA musician built $1,200 tiny houses for the homeless. Each night, tens of thousands of people sleep in tent cities, crowding the palm-lined boulevards of Los Angeles. Far more than any other city in the nation, the homeless population in the entertainment capital of the world has hit new record highs in each of the past few years, even with all the leftist, progressive, statist, government-loving policies. But a 39-year-old struggling musician from South LA thought he had a creative fix. Elvis Summers, who went through stretches of homelessness himself in his 20s, raised over $100,000 through crowdfunding last spring. See, people will fund things voluntarily. With the help of professional contractors and others in the community who sign up to volunteer. No coercion, total voluntarism, completely in line with libertarian values. Through his nonprofit, Starting Human, he has built dozens of solar-powered tiny houses to shelter the homelessness. See, we have totally voluntary, environmentally friendly methods done by the private sector, so really we should be expecting leftists especially and governments in general to be praising this gentleman. Let's see what happens. Summers says that the houses are meant to be temporary solution, unlike a tent, provides the secure foundation residents need to improve their lives. The tiny houses provide immediate shelter, he explains. People can lock their stuff up and know that when they come back from their drug treatment program or court filing or finding a job all day, their stuff is where they left it. So the ability to keep your property secure is something the free market's trying to help people with, and the government stops them from doing so. This is how the free market would protect property. Let's see how the government responds. Each house features a solar-powered system, a steel-reinforced door, a camping toilet, a smoke detector, and even window alarms. The tiny structures cost Summers roughly $1,200 a piece to build. So this is the way to solve issues by competition, new innovating in ideas, and a free market where anyone can enter into. This is how we can come up with the best ideas and share the information. LA city officials, however, had a different plan to address the crisis. You'd think they'd be appreciative. A decade after the city's first 10-year plan to end homelessness, about as successful as Mao's 5-year plan, withered in 2006, Mayor Eric Garcetti announced in February a $1.87 billion proposal. $1 billion proposal to get all LA residents off the streets once and for all. He and the city council aim to build 10,000 units. So 10,000, if it were up to Eric Summers, those would cost $1,200 each. So how is $1.87 billion only getting 10,000 people houses? With supportive services over the next decade. In the interim, they are shifting funds away from temporary and emergency shelters. So see, just throwing money at the issue actually doesn't solve it. Allowing people to be free and innovate and trade voluntarily is what solves issues. Councilmember Kern Price, who represents the district where Summers' tiny houses were located, does not believe they are beneficial. Hey, slave owner Price, the fact that you don't believe something is beneficial doesn't mean you have the right to violently stop people from engaging in the activity. To the community or to the homelessness, oh, it's not beneficial. So should we go around and say, this person is not being beneficial to the community, so let's force them to provide labor. Let's forcibly take their property. Anyone who is not benefiting the community, we get to initiate violence against? Or to the homeless people housed in them. The homeless people who voluntarily take the tiny houses he voluntarily gives them. Curran Price knows that it's not good for them. Slave lover. I don't really want to call them houses. They're really just boxes, said Price. They're not safe. Compared to what, asshole? They're safer than either tents or nothing at all. So here we have someone offering others an improvement on their condition, and slave lover Price violently intervenes. Evil. Fucking evil. They are not safe, and they impose real hazards for neighbors in the community. So does having no house at all. It's an improvement. Most of Summer's tiny houses are on private land that has been donated to the project. A handful had replaced the tents. They have proliferated on freeway overpasses in the city. Summers put them there until he could secure a private lot to create a tiny house village similar to those that already exist in Portland, Seattle, and Austin and elsewhere. My whole issue and cause is that something needs to be done right now, Summers emphasizes, but the houses, nestled among door tent shantytowns, became brightly colored targets early this year for frustrated residents. Were they more frustrated that the houses were there? It's bad. I actually think they look kind of cool. And it's kind of a signal that, hey, we give people places to live. We don't just let them be homeless. I think these are much better than the alternative. And of course, how happy were they that people had nothing beforehand? First of all, it's a much better look. And second, even if it was privately owned, you'd still think that this would be an improvement. I mean, it's a difference between a bunch of goth kids hanging out at the mall and a bunch of people in suits and dresses. Obviously, you want the people in suits and dresses because it's an improvement from just loiterers who make things look worse. These houses make things look better. But the houses, I read that, council member Price was bombarded. Oh, I didn't know he was bombarded. Never mind, steal everyone's house and give it to the state. And hopefully de Blasio will allow us to redistribute houses later. Was bombarded by complaints from angry constituents. Yeah, I'm sure. The guy who is partaking in this $1.8 billion rent seek, I'm sure got a lot of angry calls. Well, weren't they also angry about homelessness? In February, the city council responded by amending a sweeps ordinance to allow the tiny houses to be seized without prior notice. Theft. On the morning of the 9th, just as the mayor and council gathered at City Hall to announce their new plan to end homelessness after they just stole homes from people who voluntarily acquired them from Elvis, police and garbage trucks descended on the tiny houses, towing 3 of them to the Bureau of Sanitation lot for disposal. Summer managed to move 8 of the threatened houses into storage before they were confiscated, but their residents were left back on the sidewalk. Their home was stolen by the state, even though many of them were on private land, because the state said, we don't count this as a house, and we're also planning something that in 10 years might yield a house that we're violently funding, so we're going to forcibly stop you from voluntarily funding that solves the issue right now. So fucking evil. If the city won't devote any resources to supporting novel solutions, Summer urges officials at least to make it easier for private organizations and individuals like him to pave the way forward. The city owns thousands. They don't own bullshit. They claim the right to own things with stolen money. Own thousands of lots, many of which have been abandoned for decades. Yeah, I mean, this is government. This is the state. And could provide sites for tiny houses, villages, or other innovating housing concepts that can have an immediate impact. Homeless people given houses immediately, state violently interferes. Everything that they have been doing doesn't work. It's just years of circles and bureaucratic holds and wait times, says Summers. 10, 20, 30, 40 years. Where's all the housing? There's a full video above. So, yeah, this is typical government, though, if you understand that the origins of the welfare state were started by Otto von Bismarck, so that if anyone saw that the Kaiser was illegitimate in Germany, they'd have such an incentive to stay in support of the Kaiser because there was a welfare state providing them with a livelihood. Second article, demand for housing in Washington, D.C. is going through the roof. Over 1,000 people move to the nation's capital every month, driving up the cost of housing and turning the city into a construction zone. Tower cranes rising above the city streets have become so common, they're just part of the background. But as fast as cranes can rise, demand for housing has shot up even faster, making D.C. among the most expensive cities in the United States, with average home prices at $453 per square foot. It's every bit as expensive as New York City. And the struggles of one home builder shows just why the city's shortage looks to continue for a long time. I got driven down the tiny house road because of affordability. And that's always what the state says. Well, things would be so expensive in a free market because the businesses just have total and complete monopoly control and everyone else is at their whim that things won't be affordable. But the opposite's occurring here. So we should see governments embracing these people. Every congressperson saying, look at what was done over here. Houses were built affordably. Simplicity, sustainability, and then mobility. Oh, they can move. So if there's a disaster, you can up and move. And, you get warning signs. So that could decrease the likelihood that earthquakes will ruin people's lives long term. Says Jay Austin, who designed a custom 140 square foot house in Washington, D.C. Despite the minuscule size, his matchbox house is stylish, well built, and it includes all the necessities, if not luxuries, of life. A bathroom, a shower, a modest kitchen, an office space, and a bedroom loft. There's even a hot tub outside. Clever design elements make the most of minimalism. We should also have people saying, look at this minimalism that people are engaging in. It's so environmentally friendly. It's so hip and it's trendy. But the state obviously is completely against this because it's a voluntary solution to a, quote, problem that's a completely created problem by government. The Matchbox's high ceiling skylight, it's even more environmentally friendly than I thought. And wide windows make the small space feel modern, uncluttered, and open. So look, imagine if you're in an abusive relationship and you don't have the money to leave. This drastically increases your freedom and your ability to have options, but the state takes this away. At a cost that ranges from $10,000 to $50,000, tiny homes like the Matchbox could help to ease the shortage of affordable housing in the capital city. Heating and cooling costs are negligible. Rainwater catchment systems help to make the home self-sustaining. That totally in line with libertarian homesteading principle. Whoever is the first person to acquire unowned or virgin property, so to speak, has a better claim to it with regards to others, because in order for there to be a second person, well, then that means a first person has to have had the right in the first place. They're an attractive option to the very sort of residents who the city attracts in abundance. Single young professional without a lot of stuff who aren't ready to take on a mortgage. The interesting thing about this demographic, this to me sounds like the statist demographic. Single, when you have a family, and you're religious, you're much less likely to be single for long periods, and you have people to rely on, friendships, close community. That's who the state targets. Young, ignorant, just got out of government indoctrination, professionals with a lot of stuff who aren't ready to take on a large mortgage. These are the people tweeting hashtag cancel rent, hashtag free college, hashtag free healthcare, because they don't have a lot of money. What better way to make little tiny houses that they can afford voluntarily as a solution? I mean, the house is probably the most expensive thing you're ever going to purchase. But tiny houses come with an enormous catch. They're illegal in violation of several codes in Washington, D.C.'s zoning ordinance. Among the many requirements in the 34 chapters and 600 pages of code are mandates defining minimum lot size, room size, alleyway widths, and accessory dwelling units that prevent tiny houses from being anything more than a part-time residence. That's why Austin and his tiny house-dwelling neighbors at Boneyard Studios don't actually live in their own homes much of the time. To skirt some of the zoning regulations, the government claims to own all the property by legal fiat. Didn't acquire it through voluntary exchange, not homesteading. They just say, we own that land and the people on it. They've added wheels to their homes, which makes them more dangerous, which classifies them as trailers and subjects them to regulation by the Department of Motor Vehicles. Oh, thank God. Almost had something unregulated by the state. But current law still requires them to either move their homes from time to time or keep permanent residence elsewhere. So, yeah, much harder to build a life, get a steady job, when the state is telling you you have to move. Even if you're on private land, you still have to move. The D.C. Office of Zoning, the Zoning Commission, the Zoning Administrator, the Board of Zoning Adjustment, and the Office of Planning all declined to comment. Oh, but government's there to educate us and tell us how things are and make sure we understand the rule of law. If we didn't have government, there'd be a ton of laws. No one would know what they are. Everyone would be fighting. Oh, there'd be all these conflicts. And what, anyone could just impose laws on other people? Oh, we need a very big state. Complex as it is, the zoning ordinance of the District of Columbia was approved in 1958. That's over 5 decades of cultural change and building innovations. Like tiny houses, the code wasn't designed to address. Shocking. One of the great things about the free market is its ability to bring success and failure. So when things are not meeting consumer demand, people don't associate with them and they don't fund them and they go out of business, sad as it is. But this is something that would need to go out of business if it didn't stay up to date. You know, if you had a organization giving its stamp of approval, this house is safe according to Keith's construction standards. It has our stamp of approval. That's why you'll want to live in it. Total voluntary operation, much like Underwriters Laboratory today. Exemptions and alterations to the code are possible. Many are granted every year, but they don't come cheaply. Lisa Stortvent of National Housing Conference estimates that typical approvals add up to $50,000 to the cost of a new single-family unit. This is why healthcare and education and housing are so expensive, because the state violently involves itself in what otherwise would be a competitive, voluntary, peaceful interaction. That's why large, wealthy developers enjoy greater flexibility to build the city, but tiny house dwellers, not so much. Fortunately, a comprehensive rewrite of the zoning code has been in the works. Oh, it's been in the works. They're going to give us the right to act voluntarily. Oh, yes. Efforts to allow more affordable housing are underway. Although many of these solutions favor large developers, obviously this is what regulatory capture is. Who do they go for the expertise? Well, the people who know the most about developments, the large developers. They write the plans, which in turn favor them. It's like Hank Paulson working for the federal government, deciding Goldman Sachs can get a bailout, and he was the former CEO of Goldman Sachs. Future plans still forbid tiny houses. Of course, even when they go to rewrite the plans, they don't count it because without homelessness, that's one less problem for them to say, oh, look, a problem. We need a very big government to solve this. Anyone who disagrees with me supports homelessness and loves poverty. Austin estimates that given the current glacial space of change among the city's many zoning committees, tiny houses are many years, if not decades out, from being allowed in the city. Can't solve homelessness voluntarily and peacefully because of violent psychopaths claiming they own human beings. For now, Jay Austin is allowed to build the home of his dreams. He just can't live there. Well, then he's not going to build it. This is the great disincentive the state creates and has us do other things like rent seek. The Matchbox has become part-time residence and full-time showpiece. The community of tiny houses at Boneyard Studio are periodically displayed to the public in hopes of changing the zoning authority that hasn't updated a zoning code in 56 motherfucking years. Here's Brian Kaplan to further explain.
In the same vein, I would say there's another very large body of regulations that is terrible for the poor, both domestically and internationally, and these are regulations that get very expensive to build homes. Right. So right now, the high wage areas of the country are places like New York, Bay Area. But you might say, why don't people in West Virginia just go and move there? And the answer is that it's so expensive to get a home there, so expensive to rent apartments, that you actually lose more money in rent that you would make from the higher wages. Right now, why is that? You might just think this is just supply and demand, but it's totally not. There's a lot of research on this. And what's going on is that the construction business would love to build an enormous amount of cheap housing. However, government does not allow it. Government makes it very hard to get permission to build. There are a lot of restrictions on things like how high you can make your buildings, how much of your land you can use, right? And standard estimates say that if you get rid of these regulations, or really dial this level of regulation in these desirable areas of the U.S. down to the normal level, that this would lead to a dramatic reduction in housing costs in desirable areas and a very large increase in total production of the country. So I actually have this thought experiment where I say, imagine we went and deregulated the housing industry. As a result, the housing supply doubled and the price of housing fell by 50%. What share of Americans would call this a disaster? Right? And I think actually, and when I did a survey, most people thought that most Americans would consider this a total disaster, even though this is a scenario where we've doubled the housing stock and it's half the price of what it used to be. So you think that people would be happy, and yet the general expectation most people have and that I have is that people would try to find the dark lining in the silver cloud of a massive expansion of affordable housing. Right? But again, if you care about the poor, then obviously the poor would benefit if they could get housing for half the cost of what they're currently paying. Not only could just afford a bigger, nicer place, they wouldn't have to rent. Maybe if you're homeless, you could afford to get a place as a result. But furthermore, it would be affordable to go and move into these higher wage areas of the US and enjoy that. So those are the really big regulations that are terrible for the poor. And we can talk about others if you want. So obviously, there are some other things government does that at least seem like they're helpful for the poor. But I think it's worth pointing out that there are two very large bodies of regulation which have an enormous and bad effect for the poor. Just to get that on the table, so regulation of immigration, regulation of housing, these are two things that are terrible for the truly poor. So if you're worried about them, these are at least two massive ways of deregulation that you totally support.